Washington's got a lot of fresh faces in 2024.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And Lars, we came up with a really fun idea for the Everydayers because we've got so much stuff planned throughout the offseason. And one of the most important things coming into the 2024 season is fresh contributors. All the Everydayers know Washington is losing 20 of their 22 starters from the 2023 run to the national championship. So obviously that's a lot of production, especially when you consider Michael Penix, Odunze, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, all these guys that were drafted super high. So you and I are going to be doing our top 5 contributors for the 2024 season. We are going to be drafting them head-to-head style so we don't overlap on any names. And then we want the Everydayers to let us know down in the comments which team they like better. You've given me the good graces of giving me the first overall pick. And I'm going to go with Azzopardi here, where we're going to talk about a lot of guys over the course of the show. I'm not sure where you want to go next, whether it's Will Rogers or Denzel Boston, Jeremiah Hunter. I feel like those are, probably the guys that you're going to want to talk about very soon. But none of this works without Azzopardi and a functioning offensive line. Something we've talked about, something we're continuing to harp on, where there are going to be a lot of guys along the offensive line that we might see rotate at different points this season. Both you and I believe there are going to be 2 certain starters as of right now. As we look at this roster on May 21st, there are 2 certain starters, and that's Azzopardi at right tackle and Gardner Millar at left guard. And the more we look at it, a lot of this, even though he's not playing on the blind side, a lot of the offensive line success is going to hinge on Azzopardi. And if he can just be that one solid anchor and everybody else around him can just continue to move and just find some success and be solid. We're not asking for them to be an over the top amazing offensive line, but if they can be solid, then this team is certainly going to have a shot at some nice success in 2024.
No doubt. It's what we talked about before the show, where in order to have the offense go, you have to have the line to protect. And with that being said, I'm actually going to pivot slightly off of this because I think there's going to be a run of 4 or 5. There's going to be a run of 4 or 5 players that are obvious, but none of this works if you don't have somewhat of a defense as well. And everything on defense starts with Carson Bruener. Yeah, so when we talk about an all-around linebacker and all-around impact player who can drop in coverage, come up in the run, really just set up the defense. That's exactly what he has to do in this scheme, is set up the defense. He was wearing the audio headset during spring camp, or at least for mostly. He was, let's just, I would say, the first team audio headset guy. Obviously Cam Fab, and I think one other player, or there was one other linebacker that also, I believe, had a headset on at one point when he would come out. But Carson really is going to be this tone setter on defense. And so, to carry on your point, in order for the offense to do what it has to do and actually count, you also have to have a defense. And so that's why I think when you look at this defense, everything starts with Carson Bruener, and then you can kind of sort through the rest.
So I really like that you took Carson Bruener this high, because it's a game we like to play. We'll probably play a little bit closer, as we get into the fall, of one award, who gets it. If I had to play that game right now, if you just said, all right, pick one guy who's going to win a national award on this team, I would have to go with Carson Bruener. And it's really not close, in my opinion, right now, where he's a guy who looks like he can lead the team in tackles. We know how productive he can be, and just has a nose for the football and do all the different things that you want to see a linebacker do. And I just love that answer. And I think that he's a guy who just the name of the show, everything we're talking about right now, is guys who are going to produce at a high level, is just the top producers. Carson Bruener could end up being the number 1 overall producer on this team as a whole. And with that being said, going with number 2 here, it's tough. And as much as, I want to go with the quarterback, I can't, especially since it's competitive here. I can't not choose Denzel Boston as my number 2 guy right here. as you know, you and I we're the leaders of the Denzel hype train here on the Locked On Huskies podcast. Throughout spring practice, all David Dares know that every single day we came on here and saying, oh, Denzel Boston did this, Denzel Boston did that. Comes out there, does it in the spring game as well, and just showing the athleticism, just the frame at 6'3", 207, everything it is that we know he can do during the season and has waited for 2 years to do behind Odunze, behind Jalen Millen, behind Jalen Polk. It's all going to come to fruition this season. And having a running mate like Jeremiah Hunter certainly helps, where that's going to take a lot of coverage away from him, knowing what an established option he is. And somebody we'll talk about later in the week, too, if they can get Zachary Franklin from Ole Miss, who's rumored to be on a visit over these next couple of days. If somehow they pull that off, Washington is going to have an exciting receiving corps this year.
No doubt. And I think that's exactly what leads me to this next pick, which again, this is not a slight as to who I'm not picking, but it's what we kind of been keeping the theme of, where there's no slight to the quarterback, but it's more about the pieces around him than it is about like last season, for example. It was Michael Penix had a great offensive line and great talent, but Michael Penix put the ball every single time where it needed to be. And he just happened to have a really good offensive line in front of him, skill talent around him. Where Rodgers is more of a point guard in that regard, where if you can get the ball into space with guys like that, which is why I think Jonah Coleman helping out with Rodgers will be just as impactful. And again, I want to be clear because I know that this is now going to lead into Will Rodgers likely in the next couple of picks here. But this is no slight against Will. This is just in order for him to be as effective as possible, everything around him has got to work. And that starts with Jonah Coleman on the ground, potentially running off the right side behind Drew Azzopardi, or running behind the left side with guard Memolar and Maximus McCree, potentially starting a left tackle. Got to throw out that caveat in there. More likely than not starting. But it's going to take having a run game mixing in with this passing attack to truly make the offense go, because we saw what happened last year when there wasn't a running game and some teams were able to stack the box and really, or not stack the box, but really guard against the deep pass, and we saw Arizona State do it perfectly against Penix. You have to have that semblance of a run game, and that's why going to get a big established player like Jonah Coleman from Arizona, that to me, there's going to be a slight. It's not going to be a huge difference, that's why I put Jonah Coleman just above Will.
So I like where you're going there, and I certainly see it, because the more we talk about Jonah Coleman, the more it's not just him as a running back. See, I actually had him a little bit lower on my list because I've got 10, 12 guys here written down where it's, all right, maybe I'll go here, maybe I'll go there. So I like that you have him this high, because one of the most important things with Jonah Coleman that we saw last season was his ability to be a 3-down back, because it's not just his ability running the ball. It's his ability as a pass catcher. It's his ability in pass protection, where he can do all those things, and just, he knows the scheme really well. And we talked about for the spring game, one of the first things he said to us was talking about just that install of the play where Carson Bruener came around and threw the dart across the field to him. Talked about how he was like, I was reading the field for the play, and I knew I was going to be open. And I told Carson if DeMond Williams, who the play was designed to, if he wasn't open, just look for me across the field, and I was going to be open. So he knows he plays the game with a very high football IQ. And it's something where, when combined with Cameron Davis especially, that this could end up being one of the better running back duos in the Big Ten, which is something that I've been preaching for a while, and I'm really excited to see. And Lars, I'll get to my number 3 right after the break, because we're going to send a message to our good friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. For all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. You can keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right. Where to go with number 3? Because you've left me so many options that I have written down here where it feels like I might end up going with like all my offensive guys at this point. So we're also going to throw in an honorable mention at the end of this because it's fun. We like doing this. But I've got to go with the obvious one here, and that's Will Rogers, because obviously, right? this all has to function with a quarterback, and it's something we've talked about. And I have to put this caveat on here because it sounds like an insult, but I really don't mean it. That Will Rogers is the perfect stopgap for Michael Penix, where watching what Michael Penix did last season was so incredibly special. You and I we were so lucky. We feel just so lucky every single day to be a part of that and to cover it the way we did. And watching Will, it's different, where he doesn't have the same arm strength down the field, where he doesn't have the same zip on the ball, but he does all the little things right in the same way that Michael Penix did, where that's the biggest thing between both those guys is they both have that field vision, that IQ to know when the ball needs to come out, to, have the ability to push it downfield, where again, it's not the same level of arm talent. And it certainly looks a little bit different coming out of Will's hand, but that doesn't mean that he's not a talented quarterback. And that doesn't mean that he's not able to function at a very, very high level. And with all the skill players around him, with Denzel, with Jeremiah Hunter, Giles Jackson, and these running backs as well that we just talked about, if the offensive line holds up, Lars, and that, we know that's a big F, and we're going to continue to talk about that point throughout the summer. But if the offensive line holds up, this really could be one of the better offenses in the Big Ten. And it sounds optimistic when we say that, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities. We can't just say, the offensive line is untested, this team's going to be bad. No, that's because that's not how it works. And we've seen Jedd Fisch has been able to scheme it up and able to make it work. And Will Rogers is the perfect guy to help that function.
Yeah, this isn't a slight against Will in any regard to have him at number 5. It's a byproduct of kind of what's around him. 3. Oh, well, the 5th player off the board, right? The 5th.
Oh, okay, fair. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Just because, obviously, when you mentioned college, the game of football, everything's built around a quarterback, no doubt, without question. But in order to have that true success, that you have to have all the pieces around, and that's why we kind of laid it out the way we have. Which is why I am going to go back. I mean, there's a couple ways I can go. There's going to be on defense. I'm deciding between the two. And I think keeping in the spirit of locking down quarterbacks, you got to have a lockdown cornerback.
Okay.
So I'm talking about Ephesians Priceock here. This is one where we saw him make a number of plays, and in the same respect, we saw him get beat by some very good receivers. So I think it's a good kind of indicator to see iron sharpening iron in spring camp is only going to lead to iron sharpening iron in fall camp. We saw what Ephesians Priceock can do at Arizona opposite Takaria Davis. Obviously, no doubt it helps when you have an all-world quarterback playing opposite you, kind of like what the Seahawks had with the Legion of Boom all those years. It's easy to lock down one half of the other field when you don't need to worry about anything else on the other side. But when it comes to Washington, we've seen Priceock be able to jam at the line. We've seen him be able to draw back in coverage and make those reads and make several plays on the ball. Recorded, 3 or 4 interceptions in the spring? At least not a couple. There was a couple picks in the spring, at least, what you say. But looked really good. And when you look at what Washington has coming back at the room, we like Thaddeus Dixon. We like Elijah Jackson. But kind of keeping in the similar mold of what we've been saying, it all starts at the top with Ephesians Priceock, because he allows everybody else to come in behind him, allows Thaddeus to play opposite and kind of play some jam ball, bully ball, things like that. And then, as you mentioned on the show, having that safety help over the top is only going to help, which I'm sure we'll get to later on.
Absolutely. And so I really like that you went here. Another guy that I had pretty high on the list here, but this is something that I know we've harped on previously throughout spring practice, is this Belichick defense functions at its best when it has a high caliber cornerback that it can rely on, where he might not be asked to guard the number 1 guy every week, where that was a big signature of the Belichick defense, where instead of just having him just say, okay, he's going to man up and play against the top guy every single week, they have him take the number 2 guy, which is something we saw a couple times over the course of spring, where he wasn't always lined up across from Denzel Boston. And his task is, okay, you're going to lock down their number 2 guy, and we're going to bracket the number 1. We're going to make sure that we always have a double coverage on that guy, which is fine. And that worked a lot. We saw this Patriots defense for so long succeed at such a high level because of that's, I'm just going to say it because I know people are just going to call me a Patriots homer every time I do it, but because of that sort of genius, because that's exactly what it is. But no, I'm serious, because having Prysock, he frees up so much because he plays man coverage at such a high level. And I don't think he's going to lead this team in interceptions. I don't. But that's because I don't think he's going to see the amount of targets needed to do that. Where I think when we look at somebody like Jordan Shaw, or we look at somebody who I'll get to later on, I think that there are going to be guys who have plenty of more opportunities to do that and lead the team, rather than Ephesians Prysock, where we're going to get to the end of the year. And I mean this not as a comparison in terms of talent, but in terms of what happened. Where, Lars, you remember 2021 when Kyler Gordon was being tested week in and week out? Do you remember why? It's because nobody wanted to throw at Trent McDuffie, because nobody wanted to do that. Yeah. And I'm not saying it's going to get to that level where we're going to be comparing Ephesians Prysock to Trent McDuffie, but it's going to be that same thing of, oh yeah, no, the teams are just not testing Prysock. They're going to go after Jordan Shaw. They're going to go after Elijah Jackson or Thaddeus Dixon, or they're going to try to, test Justin Harrington against a tight end or something like that. I feel we're going to see that a whole lot more than we are with Ephesians Prysock with whoever he's lined up against. So I love that pick from you.
Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead. Just real quick.
Yeah,
just real quick, just to add on to that, the thing to keep in mind is, I'm glad you said that, because it's not a negative that Prysock doesn't have all those picks. Where we saw Trev, it's a great analogy, because we saw Trent McDuffie get some picks, but never have those true 5, 6, 7, 8 interception seasons.
Yeah,
because nobody wants to target him. So you have to have that guy not get the attention so everybody else can get the attention. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's what I said.
So let's get to my number 4 here, because you're kind of forcing my hand. Where I love Jeremiah Hunter. I've been so impressed with him. I've had so much fun watching him. I remember watching that touchdown he had in the Cal game against Washington last year, and just thinking to myself, man, I really love this guy, and I wanted to see him on that offense last year, and seeing him in the offense this year is really fun, really exciting, and I love that. I love that he's here, but I'm not taking him here because I have to go on the defensive side here. And one of the most important parts of the defense, as we just mentioned, that it needs a whole lot of things to function at a high level, is a high functioning edge rusher. So I've got to go with Zach Durfee here. And I was so impressed with him throughout spring camp. He just did such a good job, and he's clearly improved so much under Jason Kafusi. And yes, he's out with the elbow injury. It does sound like he'll be back for fall camp. Doesn't sound like there's been any setbacks or anything to note in that regard, but it needs a high functioning edge rusher. And if Zach Durfee is, a guy who comes out and has 7, 8, 9 sacks this year, I don't think either you or I are going to be surprised by that, because of his athleticism, because of his power, because of something that he's able to do on the field, and just the way he's going to be utilized in the scheme. That's something I'm really excited to watch. So Zach Durfee is my number 4.
And that was going to be my other pick if I didn't take Prysock, just for clarification. So I'm glad you picked him, because it's, and the only reason I think that hurt Durfee was not Durfee's fault, where he just didn't have last season to show what he could do at the FBS level. We saw what Prysock can do. That to me is the only reason that separated those two, because both of them are going to be feeding off of each other. If you think about it, Durfee forcing the pressure, the back end confusing the quarterback. The quarterbacks are the ones that benefit off of all of that. So when it all works in tandem together, this is exactly the type of style that Washington needs to play with.
So who's your number
now for mine? Yeah. I was going to say, so for mine, I think, I've only taken one offensive guy, so I might as well do it again with Jeremiah Hunter. I might as well take this one off the board, because this one, and this is also something to consider when we talk about feeding off of each other. One of these two, without question, is going to eat. I believe it's Denzel Boston. I think Jeremiah is still going to eat, but both of these guys, like we saw last season, where just because, I could see a game where Jeremiah has 3 catches for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Denzel has 7 catches for 100 yards and no touchdowns. And then I could see that 2 games later flipping, where these two guys, they both can do something different. Jeremiah Hunter, with his size, obviously more of a target in the red zone, but we've seen him on every point of the field go and get the ball. Obviously, as you mentioned, we saw it against Washington at Husky Stadium in the end zone last season. But even still, without that element, and I think that is a key element, now that I say that, to acknowledge, especially with Will Rogers. We saw that so much in the spring, how much they worked on their red zone fade, not just the fade ball, but just finding weapons in the inside the 20-yard line. Jeremiah Hunter alone might have, I want to say, 7 touchdowns inside the 20 alone.
I could certainly see that. I like that a lot because having one really good receiver in this offense would be great. Every offense must have one really great receiver, but having 2 is so important. And I just like it's not going to be what it was last year. We know that. We're going to keep harping on that point. But as Thaddeus Dixon said, it's not going to be that big of a drop off. He told us that over the course of spring practice. He said, yeah, no, guarding Jeremiah Hunter and Denzel Boston is not that different from guarding Rome, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan. Yeah, the skill set's a little bit different, but these guys are just as good. And it's just one of the most exciting things about this offense. And it's why we have to come back to the offensive line again. We're going to keep talking about it, but that's one of the reasons the offensive line is so important. Just making sure you can get the ball into these guys' hands is so crucial. And it's something that needs to happen. And Lars, that being said, let's get to my number 5. So I'm going a little bit out of left field here for this one, where there are a bunch of guys that I feel that, I really wanted to pick here. I wanted to go with the Sebastian Valdez. I thought that would be a fun pick. I wanted to go with Cameron Davis. Thought that'd be fun too. But I'm going with Washington's most recent commit here. I'm going with Cameron Broussard in this one as my number 5. And let me tell you why. I am very, very impressed with his film. I talked about it over on Locked On College Football with our good buddy Spencer McLaughlin as well. And I said, this is a guy who is going to come in and he's going to push for the starting job right away. You and I kind of talked a little bit about that on yesterday's show as well. But the more we kind of look at him, I love the way he fits in this defense. He can do a little bit of everything. He's a really good tackler. He was second on Sac State in tackling, in total tackles last season. He's productive. He finds the football. 4 picks. He had 17 passes defense. He's really good at just getting to the ball, and putting him in this scheme where he's going to be a little bit better over the top than I think Cameron Fabiculano is, which is no slight because we saw him make a great improvement in that regard last season, which I think just speaks more to how good Cameron Broussard is than it does take away from Cam Fabiculano, because I think Cam Fab is going to be a major contributor in this defense as well this year. But I'm just really excited about this guy. I love the length. I love the athleticism. I just love everything that he can do from that center field spot when he wants to walk down and play against the run. And I've just got to go with him in my number 5 spot here.
I like that a lot. I think it's a safe bet in terms of one of those veteran guys breaking through in that safety room. But every time, I'm glad you mentioned it, because when we talk about Broussard's film, every time I turn on the tape, there's something new every time. And I think that's something to consider, where he can do so many different things at 6'3", 200 pounds. That's the other important factor in that regard, where when you look at the other guys in the room, Cam Fab's, I believe, 195, somewhere in that range, close to 200, 6'1". But then you got Mikel, who's kind of hanging around that 5'11", 6 foot, little shorter than Broussard. But man, it's stacking weapons is what it's doing. You're doing what you're doing on offense, on defense. You're stacking weapons to combat weapons. That's exactly what you're doing, which is why I'm going completely off the reservation for my last pick, because before we get to the honorable mentions here, because, and this is, I'm going to make this legitimate argument here. What's the one thing you really truly need, especially when you're trying to work through a first-year program, when you need to take some free points every now and then?
You're going to go with Grady Gross, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
I respect this.
But I mean this sincerely, because when you look at what Grady did last season, coming in as a walk-on, there was I think 3 missed kicks in a row. One was blocked against Utah, or one was there was a miss, a block, but there were two blocks than anything else. But has the game winner against Oregon, has the game winner against Washington State. Without Grady Gross, this team doesn't go to the playoffs last year. This team doesn't win. They potentially lose 2 games, because here's the thing. if Grady misses one of those kicks, Camden Lewis makes it, we're talking about that game differently. Grady Gross doesn't get put in position to have the game winner against the Cougars, we're not talking about a potential national championship run, even though we should be. So that's why, in order for UW to truly capitalize on this retooling, reloading year, it's going to require a lot from Grady Gross. And we saw his range get a little bit better. I'm curious if that range can go even further this season. We saw it in spring where again, it's not necessarily pressure when 84 of your other teammates plus the walk-ons are coming out to heckle you. It's not necessarily the same pressure as kicking in Husky Stadium with 72,000 people, half of which are hoping you miss because they're Oregon fans. Grady deserved everything that he got last season, and Absolutely. I think it's worth shouting him out, especially, again, because you don't want to say, hey, a kicker's your top 3 guy, right? That nobody's ever going to say that unless you're Justin Tucker. But if Grady Gross regresses, who's your second kicker? I mean, we know that Addison Shock and things like that. So having that kicker and a consistently good one, I got to put him in my top 10. Has to be.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. I didn't even really think about that. No slight to Grady until you said. I was like, oh yeah, no, this makes a lot of sense. I like that a lot. So for my honorable mention, I mentioned him a second ago. I've got to go with Sebastian Valdez here, where this is a guy who I have really, really high hopes for this season. We've seen him make such a big impact at the FCS level. And if he can keep that going in the Big Ten, where I don't think he's got the same amount of sacks, but if he can just continue to get that kind of pressure and be a dominant force in the middle, that's going to allow Zach Durfee. That's going to allow Lance Holtzclaw, Jaden Wayne, Isaiah Ward, whoever it is coming off the edge to make a big impact, because there's nothing better than a pass rusher who consistently can collapse the pocket from the middle of the field, where, yeah, sure, a Myles Garrett or TJ Watt level edge rusher can always wreck the game. But there was a reason that Aaron Donald was always considered to be on a different level because of what he was able to do from the middle. When quarterbacks get pressure right in their face, that is the toughest thing to deal with. We saw it with Mason Graham in the national championship game against Washington, against Michael Penix. He made that so much harder on Mike. And if I'm not saying that by any means that Sebastian Valdez is going to get to that level, but he's received a lot of high praise from his teammates. Some of them called him the strongest guy on the team, where if he can continue to get a push and just be an impactful force in the middle of the field, this is a guy who I think can really change Washington's defense.
I like that pick a lot. I'm just going to go on the other side of it. Give me Javon Parker. And there's no fight to Sebastian Valdez, but because like we said before, we can't overlap picks, so this is no slight one way or the other. But one of those two guys, I think they're both going to eat. Same thing with the receivers. They're both going to eat. But Javon Parker has really been emerging over the past 18 months, and it just seems like had it not been for having so many veterans in front of him last season, he would have been a starter. And so this season coming in next to Sebastian Valdez, honestly, between the two, you could make the case Javon Parker more proven at this level because he is. Like, yeah, Valdez is coming up from the SCF. Well, that's no slight because, again, so is Broussard, so are a couple other guys. And there's nothing wrong with that. We've seen guys make that jump before. But having somebody who played against, I believe he played against Michigan State, played a number of key games, had an impact, now gets the chance to start. I'm really looking forward to what Javon Parker could do in the middle of that field because same thing with Valdez. Those guys can both push the pass, push the pocket, and also do a good job stuffing the run. I do think of the two, I would lean more towards Parker as a better rusher, but I'm not. But that's not, again, no slight to Valdez. I think that one of those two is going to end up settling in more of that MJLA role, and one's going to set up in the run stuffer role, and both of them can do it well. And I think that's going to be the key is how they play off of each other because they can do so many good things. You just want to make sure you're both not fitting the run on a pass play and not able to get pressure, and then you got to end up bringing an extra man in the box because both of them get stuffed. I don't think that's going to happen often, but it's worth noting that could arise. So you have to have both of those guys having an impact.
Lars, run the everydayers through your roster real quick of the 6 guys you just mentioned over the course of the show.
All right, so we started off with number 2 over Carson Bruener, star linebacker, should be a Butkus Award watch list guy for sure, if not even a semifinalist. I would hedge my bet say he'll be a finalist. I don't know if he'll win it, but I think he should be a finalist for the award. Jonah Coleman, Doug Walker saying hello to you potentially. Ephesians Prysock, lockdown quarter. I am so enamored with Prysock. I think if he could, John Richardson really is bringing back this 2014, 15, 16, 17 Washington secondary. I'm so here for it. And then we round out the list with Jeremiah Hunter, and I personally, a fan of Grady Gross. Call me a fan of Grady Gross because kickers are people too. Grady Gross is a great kid, so he deserves all the love and praise possible.
And then you got Javon Parker as your honorable mention as well. All
Correct.
Right. So my turn. Drew Azzopardi. Then I've got Denzel Boston, Will Rogers, Zach Durfee, Cameron Broussard, and Sebastian Valdez. We appreciate all the everydayers so much. We want you to let us know which group of guys you would rather build your team around. Let us know down in the comments. We really do appreciate all your support. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your constant support. It does mean so much to us. We've got so much more fun stuff like this coming at you throughout the off season. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, like we said, let us know who you think has the better roster down in the comments below. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it all really does help us out. And thank you so much for tuning in. We will talk to you on Thursday.